Hello everybody and welcome to episode 12 of Baker's Chatcast. Today I will be speaking to Absolute Radio DJ Sarah Champion, who tells us about her journey as a presenter and tells us some of the best moments she has had with interviewing musicians. I hope you enjoy. Sarah, thank you for joining me today and giving me your time. How are you?
I'm good, thank you. It's been a busy day in my little home studio that I've been working from for the past year now. In fact, it's just been just over a year that I haven't been in a professional studio. So I'm a little bit nervous about going back, to be honest, because if you've seen a professional radio studio, there's so many buttons. Will I remember what they all do when I get back in the studio? I've got no idea at this point. Such a simple setup here. I've basically got a laptop, a microphone, a little kind of microphone shield protector, and that's it in my spare room. As you can see, the glamour of it all. This is the reality.
Have you been doing every show from home then for your...
Yeah,
show?
every single one of them. In fact, we just did a special show to mark a year since lockdown, the first lockdown, obviously, which was a really lovely thing to do, actually, because we had, not just musicians on there, but we had NHS workers, we had like Dr. Ranj from This Morning come on and sort of talk about his work, as an NHS worker over the last year. And the idea was that it was like a really uplifting listen to concentrate on the positive stories of the last year and communities coming together and the lovely things that have happened, neighbours helping each other out, that kind of thing. So it was meant to be a sort of positive spin on the last 12 months, if possible. And we had lots of musicians playing exclusive sessions for us. Because we've all missed live music. My God, Can't wait for the first festivals. But so hearing live music at the moment is just such a treat, and we had everyone from sort of Texas. Charlene Spiteri did a lovely session for us, which was a nice one to kind of sing along to at home. We had Elbow. Just a bunch of musicians coming together because they're missing it as much as we are. I was chatting to Fran Healy from Travis in Los Angeles, and he said, I just can't wait to get back on the road. And he said, I didn't think I'd ever say that. You get kind of sick of spending your life on the road, but actually after a year of being stuck at home, they're dying to play live just as much as we're dying to hear them. Because
for the last year, like you say, it's all turned like virtual performances. I had loads of gigs booked for the last summer, but it was just such a shame how they all got cancelled. So it's sort of like turned that new way of life by people performing over social media and online and stuff.
Yeah, definitely. In fact, I think I was talking to Tom Grennan about kind of virtual performances and stuff, and saying obviously you can't get the same feel as you do from a live gig, but actually he was saying that he's not minded doing the virtual gigs. He said actually the last one he did, he kind of felt that way again. He felt the sort of nerves kick in before he went online and stuff like that. So that's nice. I think if anyone's sort of, however you've managed to get through the last 12 months, whatever you do for a living or don't do, or however you scratch your creative itch, whatever that might be, then you've just got to go for it, haven't you? It's been a really tough, really trying 12 months for just about everyone, but I think we can see lights at the end of the tunnel now. I say as I see snow. Have you got snow where you are? We've had sunshine and snow today. It's just the weirdest week. What's going on? Strange days.
It's actually all right outside at the minute, but we had a trinkle of it earlier, but I haven't had much of it.
No, it's really coming down now. It's so weird. There's a Prince song about it snowing in April. Sometimes it snows in April, and there it is. There it is. It's a Prince song.
As we say though, it's all looking pretty promising with all these festivals getting to go ahead and people announcing gigs and things like that. So just hopefully, fingers crossed, it'll all be back in the summer.
I know. I mean, I really hope so. I mean, obviously, a big festival for us is the Isle of Wight Festival. And normally that's one of the first festivals of festival season. It's sort of early June. So we were waiting with bated breath. Obviously, it got cancelled last year. We were kind of waiting for the announcement. And actually, I think what they've done is a really clever move. They've moved it to later on in the year. So it's now September, mid-September. When hopefully a lot of people will have had their jabs and just feel a bit more confident about, you know, getting out there and stuff. And I cannot wait for that first kind of big crowd sing along after the year we've all had. I think Liam Gallagher is headlining on the Friday night, so there will definitely be some sing-alongs to Wonderwall and Live Forever, I reckon. What do you reckon?
And I'm dying to go and see him again. So I'm hoping he announces the tour of his own as well. So yeah,
nice one.
But I want to get onto the Isle of Wight later because you've interviewed plenty of stars who I just want to hear all the stories about. Well, I'd like to start by asking you today, Sarah, after working in the radio industry for a long time now, at what age when you were younger did you decide it was the thing you wanted to do?
Okay, well, there's kind of two answers to that, really. The first one is really young. I think I heard another one of your guests talking about this, but back in the day when we had old sort of cassette tapes, I think he said that he was recording himself pretending to be on a radio show, and I thought, wow, that's exactly what I did. I'd interview my mum and dad when I was sort of like 6 or 7 in my bedroom. So the signs were there really early. I don't think I knew that I was definitely destined for a career in radio at that point, but I loved I loved recording kind of myself, pretending I was on a radio show. I loved interviewing my friends and family when they were around. So yeah, the signs were definitely there, but I don't think I'd thought about it as a way to earn a living necessarily. And then when I was about 16, I want to say, my boyfriend at that time, his dad had started to lose his sight. He was diabetic and he'd started to lose his sight. So he was relying an awful lot on the radio for his entertainment. You know, he'd listen to radio dramas and he listened a lot to our local BBC radio station as well. And I think just we were talking about work experience and stuff because it was kind of that age where you're asked to do some work experience. And he said, well, have you thought about going and volunteering at the local BBC radio station? And I really hadn't, but I thought, you know what? Yeah, why not? I'll just sort of give him a ring or, sort of volunteer to go and answer the phones or however you get a foot in the door. So I did that and they said, yeah, come along. And I think the first thing I did was answer the phones for the gardening show, which was like 6 a.m. on a Saturday morning. So I got up super early. I think my dad drove me in at like 5:30. And it was like this light bulb moment in my life of, wow, this is brilliant. Like, I love this. I love the buzz of the fact that it was live and like anything could go wrong. And if it did, you had to kind of think on your feet and go with it. And I loved the connection that the listeners had with the presenters. I loved that, I was just, my job was literally to answer the phones, say, good morning, BBC, whatever. And then put them through to the presenter if they didn't sound like they were, if they sounded all right and not like they were going to swear or just come up with something odd. So that's what my job was. But like I said, I just loved it. I really loved the buzz of it. And to be honest, that's never really gone. I still love it to this day. And it's some time on now since those early work experience days. But yeah, that was kind of it really. I think I was sort of bitten by the bug nice and early by doing a bit of volunteer work, and I carried on doing volunteer work until I put a demo together, because what ended up happening was the show after the gardening show was this guy called Timbo, and he got me in to do a bit of, I don't know, like the weather or help out with some competitions, that kind of thing. And so we got a bit of a rapport going on air, and then I put together a radio demo from just my bits of going in and helping out. And that's how I got my first radio job. I think my first, well, I was going to say my first paid radio job, but actually my first paid radio job was a few radio jobs down the line. You don't get paid at first. It's a lot of volunteering and a lot of getting up at crazy o'clock and a lot of doing it for the love of it when you first start out, definitely.
Because obviously it's something I want to achieve in my career, and I think at first, like you've just said there, it's about like not about the money at first, but just like trying to get your foot in the door. And
definitely, absolutely, 100%. And I've learned that sort of in every job I've done, even sort of with acting or presenting. You'll meet people who are there as runners, and they're literally, their job can be just to run and get you a cup of tea or get whoever's acting or the producer or the director. It can be anything really. Just do whatever you're asked to do. And I can remember thinking, well, how are you a really good runner? How are you like one of those that you then progress on to the next level, whatever that is, whether that's, you know, assisting or whatever. How do you just like make really good tea? And obviously that's not what it is. It's more about just getting your foot in the door, isn't it? Because then you get to know people. They then, if you do a good job, if you're, you know, nice to be around, people like being around you, then they'll think of you for the next gig, job, whatever it is, you know, and that's what's key. It's not about making really good tea, although that does help.
Because what you've just said there, I thought of that as well, because you're only really making tea at first, and you think, how is it possible for someone to progress to the next level? But I guess you're sort of like having a look at the controls, like you're seeing how they use all the buttons and stuff, and then you're getting like ideas of how it works, how other people aren't. So
yeah, definitely. And I think, you know, there's a lot to be said from kind of starting at the very bottom rung of the ladder, because if I hadn't, you know, sat in that control room, essentially where all the phones were to put people through, I wouldn't have sort of known that even that was a process. Before you work in radio, I don't think you appreciate the mechanics of radio, the fact that, you know, even when you get your own show, you still have to do things like back time to the hour exactly as the clock goes up to make sure you hit the news junction, things like that. You just don't think about that when you're listening to the radio, you know, before you know anything about working in a radio studio. I hate that. To this day, I hate back timing. Maths at school was not my strong point. So when you've got to kind of minus how many seconds of the song are left and it's by 60, you've got to go, oh my God, you know, and you have to get it right as well. So, it still makes me shudder whenever it comes around. But yeah, so I think it just absolutely working from the bottom rung of the ladder, it gives you a really good grounding. It gives you a really good sense of how it all works operationally, I guess.
And trying to like blend in the time, like with speaking, when I bet that's pretty tricky. Like,
yeah, I mean,
to fade the song out. Yeah.
So again, one of the first radio stations where I got my own show was a station called Heartbeats, which was in Nebworth in Hertfordshire. It is sadly not there anymore. I think it moved to maybe Jack FM or one of those. But anyway, it was this gorgeous building, this like old pump house in Nebworth House, which has been used in films like Batman as the Bat Mansion and stuff like that. And so you'd be sat there in this like little building which was just over the road from the sort of main mansion. But it's in Nebworth Park, right? So suddenly you'd sort of see a deer walking past the window. It was a lovely place to work, genuinely. But we set up that radio station. Well, the guys that set it up and I was brought on as a presenter. But I literally sat there and loaded the songs on. And I marked the in points of each song up to the lyric. So there'd be like a point. It would go, I think if I remember rightly, it would kind of go green and then it would go red. So you'd know you could talk over the green bit and then stop when the red kicked in. So I don't have that anymore. And I don't know if that's a thing anymore. It maybe is on some playout systems, but I mean, now and having, you know, talked over a lot of intros to a lot of songs, I try not to do it, like, especially if it's a really good intro. You know, no one wants to hear you talking all over the start of an epic piece of guitar. They want you to shush. So I try not to do it as much as I used to, but certainly, yeah, talking over like if a song fades, sometimes would write F meaning fade or E for hard ending, so you wouldn't talk over that, you just let it go boom and then you talk. So again, all that stuff that you just don't think about when you're listening to the radio, but once you actually work in radio, you go, oh, that's how they do it. That's how they talk right up to the lyric, because it goes red at the end.
Because like you said, I don't think anyone would want you talking over the intro to I Want to Be Adored or anything.
No, God, no, and please don't, you know, please don't. Anyone watching that wants a career in radio or that already works in radio, people are going to hate it if you do that. Just imagine it's your favourite song in the whole wide world, right? You don't want to hear someone talking about the weather over it or whatever. You just don't. So yeah, I mean, absolutely talk over the ending of songs if it's a fade. I mean, the other thing about commercial radio, which is obviously what I work in, is the sense that you have to kind of keep the music going. So to talk over the end of a song does give it a good flow. And you can talk a little bit over the intro, but I try and avoid it if I can. Real music matters and all that, as Absolute Radio say.
Yeah. Did you ever plan for an alternative career in case you didn't make it in radio, or was it strictly something you wanted to do?
Yeah, honestly, kind of having just said about, you know, being a slightly odd child and recording people in my bedroom, I still didn't necessarily think that I would be able to make a career out of radio, but I kind of knew that I wanted to do something in the media, if that makes sense. Like I knew that was a sort of exciting industry that I wanted to be in. And so I did communications and media at A-level, and then I went to Goldsmiths University and did the communications course there, BA Hons in communications, and I specialised in journalism because I thought I still wasn't quite sure of what I wanted to do, and that's fine. I don't think you need to be 100% sure of what you want to do just in case it all goes wrong, if that is your chosen path. But I think journalism for me, I was thinking it will give me quite a good grounding of whatever career it was that I ended up doing. And I still, you know, was chasing the media dream. I did do a little bit of journalism, and I worked at a magazine and a kind of work experience placement. And I realized quite quickly that print journalism wasn't really for me. And certainly I didn't have that kind of, that thirst for sort of going up to people and bothering them, like when something dreadful has just happened, sort of sticking a microphone in their face and saying, so what do you know, I just knew that wasn't me. I still don't really enjoy doing that, to be honest. Like sometimes I'll send you on the red carpet and you're sort of there for the NME Awards or something, and you're in like a massive queue of people and you have to sort of shove your microphone in someone's face and go, so how are you feeling? And it's not my favorite part of the job, that. And so I thought, okay, well, journalism maybe isn't what I want to do, but I did have the kind of qualifications, I suppose. And so actually I started out, before I got my own show, doing broadcast journalism. I was reading the news on a station in Oxford called Oxygen, which was a kind of student radio really, but then I think it got bought out by a bigger company and was sort of going places at that time. So yeah, I was reading the news, and even then, again, I sort of realized that it wasn't for me. It was just too serious. I needed to be on the side of the microphone where you could laugh. Because the thing is, if you say sort of quite funny content in a really serious news voice, it makes it even funnier. And I remember doing the story about Dodgems and someone being, oh no, see, that's why I can't do news. The story was that someone had been rammed from behind. And I'm sorry, if you say that in like a really serious news voice, it's really funny. And I started to laugh. And the guy who was on the side of the microphone where you could laugh was like, oh no, no. And so, yeah, that again was another sort of light bulb moment in my life where I thought, this isn't for me. It's not for me. I need to be on the side where you can laugh about these things. And so I asked the program controller there at the time if I could have a show instead of doing the news. And he said yes. I mean, I was going in voluntarily, I think, every Sunday evening, getting the Oxford Tube bus from London to Oxford to go and do this show of a Sunday evening. But again, you know, you do it for the love of it. And I genuinely loved it. I think I was getting paid, but I think I remember that the fare, like the bus fare, was more than I was getting paid. I seem to remember that being true. But yeah, again, it's what you do when you're starting out.
I think you mentioned about laughing, and I think it must have been that sense of when someone else is laughing on the other side, like whenever like you see someone laughing and they make you laugh. That must have been pretty hard, just watching someone breaking down with laughter while you're trying to read the news out.
Honestly, there are so many, and I'm really lucky that I'm still friends with a lot of friends that I've made over the years in radio. But if we ever get together, we just relive those moments and those. Can I swear on this podcast? Can you beep it out?
Yeah.
That was a really good friend of mine. I remember sort of she was doing the news, which is where you can't laugh, right? And so I used to see her through this sort of wall of glass into her studio, and I would sort of say it's 5:30 and here are the headlines with, and I won't say her name. As I said, it's 5:30 and here are the headlines with, and I crossed over to her and she's reading the news, but in a like really quiet way, like going, almost whispering the news, like a man's been arrested, blah, blah. I was like, what's going on? And at which point she caught my eye and realized that she was live. I think she was rehearsing, which is why she was talking really quietly. But instead of being really professional and just kind of carrying on with the news in a normal sounding voice, she just went, shit, right to the microphone. And I was like, oh my God, we're live and you've just shit at like 5:30 in the evening. And like it was one of my first jobs as well, so you sort of think, oh my God, I'm going to get fired. And actually I don't think we even had any complaints. I'm not sure, maybe the news jingle was particularly loud. I remember pressing the next button to go straight to a song after she'd said shit to the microphone. I was like, oh no. But it happens, and I swear you'll never meet a single radio presenter who hasn't had something like that happen at some point. But that's my point. That's why I go back to saying why radio is so great, because you have to roll with the punches. You have to just get on with it. It's live. So if someone was just shit on there, you have to carry on. You apologize, obviously, but you have to carry on. And I think that's why radio for me still has that buzz. Your adrenaline's going the whole time because someone could swear into the microphone at any point. Hopefully they don't, because they're professional, but it does happen.
But I guess it's not the worst thing you could have said.
Oh God, no.
It could have been a lot worse.
It could have been a lot worse, and I've heard quite a few slip of the tongues, with people not meaning to swear, but they'll sort of just mispronounce something. Or there's a great little, if you go on YouTube and just put in radio bloopers, I think Nikki Campbell did an amazing one. So, it happens, and it happens in real life too. Everyone's human, and you make mistakes, and you just have to own them, I suppose, and apologize if it is something horribly offensive if you haven't meant it.
And obviously, since these moments, you've gone right to the top at Absolute Radio, working 11 till 2 on the main show on weekends and working on Absolute 80s 10 till 1 during the week. Is there anything else you'd like to add about these shows? Like what they include?
So yeah, I've been on Absolute 80s for a couple of years now. And I guess I was always aware that it's a big old radio, so like the listeners, I think it's one of the most listened to stations digitally, or it certainly was for a long time, and certainly one of the most popular as well, because for a lot of people the 80s sort of were their glory days, and it takes them back to those days. And doing the chart show, especially on a Sunday afternoon, there's such a lovely kind of community feeling to that. And I'll get so many tweets with people saying, oh, this reminds me of, being at school or college or whatever. I can remember when I very first started in radio, would you sort of guess the years? And I'd be really amazed that people could guess the year that, maybe 4 or 5 songs were from. And now as I'm older, I realize exactly why you can do that. And it's because songs will take you back to a specific time in your life, a specific year. I'll listen to a certain song and I'll be, okay, yeah, I can remember listening to this on the train when I was heading into Southend College. So I know the year straight away. Those moments, music more than anything can do that for me. It can take you back to like a specific moment, a specific memory. And yeah, it's just such a lovely thing. So the chart show is really loved of a Sunday afternoon. In fact, there was a moment over lockdown where we thought we wouldn't be able to do it, and I thought, oh God, I'm going to get so much grief if this show goes, because everybody loves, I get so much love for it. And my boss was like, well, it's going to be really tricky, you could just go to a straight music show. And I was like, no, they're not going to have that. I can't do a straight music show in place of a show that's that well loved. People plan cooking their Sunday lunches around it and stuff. So yeah, that show's quite special actually. And that's even, I do think over this last year, although it has been so tough for so many of us. And again, I go back to when I first started out in radio. You're the voice in people's kitchens, living rooms, cars. They feel like they know you because you're that friendly, upbeat voice, even when, you know, it's all gone a bit wrong with the global pandemic. And, you know, I think I can speak for a lot of my colleagues as well, and saying this year's been tough for us as well. You know, you don't always feel like going on air and being like, hey, how's everyone doing? When, you know, my mum was taken into hospital at one point, you know, and she's okay now, touch wood and all that. But having said that, I would also say that sometimes when you have to sound upbeat, even if you're not on the inside, that in itself is a weird sort of therapy. Like, you start feeling better because you're acting better. I guess it's a bit like if you're feeling really down and you just start smiling or laughing, and then you start feeling better because you're sort of sending those messages to your brain or whatever. But, you know, for me, music is such a mood lifter. I have like a playlist on my phone which is just like feel good music, and I think in this last year, God, we've needed it so much. We've needed an escape, and I think music and radio has actually really come into its own this last year, definitely.
And I think, as you said, with your chat show that you do, and I think personally, when I listen to radio, I think a good radio show is like that interaction with the fans or listeners, whatever you want to call them. But I don't know, how do you feel about that, presenting yourself? Do you feel like you need that interaction with the listeners?
Oh, definitely. I mean, I can remember, you know, my weekend shows, which you mentioned, sort of Saturdays and Sundays, there came a point, and I know it sounds really daft, but one of my bosses had sort of said to me, maybe just do a bit more kind of reflecting people's days, what they're up to, read out the texts, you know. And I think around then I sort of implemented this sort of rate your Sunday thing. I think I used to call it score your Sunday on a scale of 1 to 10, or how active you were or not active, you know, had you made it from the bed to the sofa. And it was just such a small thing, but a real turning point, because the show became that much more interactive and involved with the listeners' lives. And the more you do that kind of stuff, the more people will volunteer that stuff. So if you say, oh, this one's for Alan, whose upper ladder has been put to work, you know, doing DIY, you will then get a flurry of texts and tweets and all that stuff from other people doing similar, or, you know, especially over the summer, you know, people having barbecues and all that kind of stuff. And it's just really lovely. It just gives that sense of what people are doing, you know, what you're soundtracking, essentially, because that's all you're doing. You're soundtracking people's lives, and whether that's loudly and they've got you on headphones while they're out for their daily walk at the moment, or you know, you're just in the background. I'll happily be in the background for you while you get the barbecue on a sunny Sunday afternoon. That's kind of, you know, that's more than fine by me. So yeah, interaction is really key. And again, especially in this last year, I've really noticed a lot more of kind of that, of feeling that, of that interaction, of that sort of sense of community with the listeners. You know, you'll get regular texters, you'll get regular tweeters, and you feel like you know them, and you know their dogs and their kids and stuff, because they let you into their lives, and that's a really lovely thing. You know, it's a really special thing, and I never take that for granted. I think it's something, you know, that I feel really honoured, actually.
Yeah, because you mentioned that you watched a bit of the last one, and he said about how he grabbed like a following from his show. And is that the same with you? Because you said like regular listeners and.
Yeah, definitely. In fact, there's, you know, over the years, there is a guy who would always sign his sort of correspondence off, whether it was texts or emails or whatever, Marty from New York. And he loved the radio station so much that he used to come over on like holidays sort of 2 or 3 times a year. And I remember sort of thinking, well, this guy's obviously like a bit odd. Like, is he someone that we need to be worried about? And one of my presents, you know, one of the other presenters, like, no, he's genuinely the nicest guy. So he came into the studio, and he sat in the studio on one of my shows, and like we're friends now. I mean, I've been over to New York, and you know, he's shown me around New York and stuff. So yeah, you know, there are some slightly odd people out there, but there are in all walks of life. And, you know, he's not one of them. He's genuinely a lovely guy who just loved the radio station and loved getting involved in the shows. And actually, I'm so glad, because there's one or two occasions where I'd forgotten that I was on air, or like I used to do a lot of cover work. And I remember being in a cab once going home from another job that I was doing. And he messaged me saying, "Aren't you on air later?" And I was like, "Am I? Oh my God, yeah, I am. I have to turn around, go back into London." So he was actually really, you know, he's been really useful over the years as well, having such a thorough, in-depth knowledge of the radio station. So yeah, yeah, it's quite extraordinary, really.
I bet it's good to like have that close connection as well, and know that someone really, really does love it.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, like I said, you can't really take it for granted, but for a lot of people, and especially, again, I know I keep coming back to this last year, but I think it's really a moment where radio has come into its own. You know, there's been a lot of people living alone in lockdown, and that's just not right. As human beings, we need other people, we need communication, and we need to have those friendly voices. So yeah, it's a really special thing to be in people's homes, in their living rooms, kitchens, wherever they listen to the radio, in their cars. And I think for anyone starting out in radio, you have to really bear in mind that actually the people that interact with you are such a small percentage of the people listening. You know, it's maybe 2% or maybe even less. So, and I mean that across the board, by the way, you know, for people getting involved in competitions and all that kind of stuff. So you have to, while it's important to interact with those people, you still have to think about the other 98% of people who are listening, who don't get involved and who don't text and don't tweet. You know, that's who you're targeting, really. So as much as it's really nice to have regulars and have those little insights to their lives, you can't get too kind of closed off to the other people. You know, you can't make it feel like a club that doesn't include them, because everyone wants to be included when they're listening to the radio. So
obviously you do the main show, like I've said, and I also said that you work on 80s. Is there anything you specifically like about the 80s to work on that station? Because obviously you've got absolute 90s, noughties, 60s, it all goes on, but is there anything you specifically like to just work on the 80s other than another one like 90s or anything?
Yeah, I think I'll be really honest. When they brought me over to Absolute 80s, I had been on Absolute Radio 90s for a little while. And in fact, I did a 90s show on the main station at one point. I think it was 12 till 2 on a Saturday, where I just played 90s music. And I love 90s music, right? So I felt really at home on Absolute Radio 90s. And it was only because a presenter left Absolute 80s, a presenter called Martin, that my boss kind of came into the studio one day and he said, "How do you feel about doing Absolute 80s?" And I was like, "Oh yeah, sure, definitely." And I thought that meant I was staying on Absolute Radio 90s, but of course it didn't. It meant I was leaving Absolute Radio 90s to go to Absolute 80s. So then I was actually I don't know how I feel about that, because I really loved being on the 90s station. So actually, I went to 80s a little bit reluctantly. And I think my boss was a little bit surprised at my reaction, because I think he thought I'd be really pleased, because Absolute 80s is actually a much bigger station. Like I said, I think it was one of the most sort of popular commercial radio stations digitally for a long time. It's won awards. You know, it's a big old radio station. The listenership is huge. I mean, it's on a par with Absolute Radio. So once I started on Absolute 80s, and once quite a few of my friends were saying, I love Absolute 80s. It's such like feel good music. You know, I always have it on. And once I started, I was like, okay, yeah, no, I'm fine with this now. And like I said, I love doing the chart show of a Sunday afternoon, and Absolute 80s does seem to have a really lovely listenership as well. Again, you know, people who just listen to Absolute 80s and don't listen to Absolute Radio. So you have to be careful there sometimes, because you can kind of assume that because they listen to Absolute Radio or the Absolute Radio network, that they're aware of all these other radio stations, but actually for some people they just listen to Absolute 80s. So I can't necessarily talk about what I'm doing on the other radio station too much, because that means nothing to them, and vice versa, really, you know. Although I will try and big up Absolute 80s on Absolute Radio quite often, especially the chart show, because that's one that I think you know, has such a lovely listenership and is such a lovely listen on a Sunday afternoon, because that's when the charts used to be on for a lot of us. So we sort of relive the glory days, and taping the charts off the radio and stopping it before the DJ spoke, all that kind of stuff.
Obviously you mentioned that you love 90s music. What I want to know is there any specific bands or artists that you love playing on the radio when they get given to you?
Yeah, I mean, you know, again, I have to say, I'm so lucky to be working for Absolute Radio, having worked for other radio stations where I haven't necessarily enjoyed the music, but you have to sound like you do. So, for instance, before Absolute Radio, I probably shouldn't name the radio station, so I won't, but I was at a radio station where I didn't necessarily love the music, but of course you're on the radio station, so you have to sound like you do. You have to be really upbeat about that song by some boy band who you've never been into and never would be into in a million years, and say, what a great song, you know, because that's what people expect. So like I said, I'm so lucky that I don't have to fake that on Absolute Radio. I grew up listening to you know, Blondie and Fleetwood Mac, thanks to my dad, really, you know, his record collection, and Motown even. I mean, I do a show on Magic Soul now as well on Friday and Saturday nights, which is sort of the best of soul and Motown. I've got quite an eclectic music taste in music, really, but I'd say the roots of it are rock music. So for me, you know, it's no hardship to play bands like the Rolling Stones and the Beatles and Nirvana on Absolute Radio, but then I enjoy a good pop tune as much as the next person on Absolute 80s as well. So it's kind of having a really nice mix between the two main radio stations I work for Absolute, because it's really, honestly, and I'm not just saying this, it's really rare that I play a song that I don't like on both of the stations. And if I do, I just won't talk about it. Because there are certain songs that do, what's the word? They, I think the sort of technical term that the heads of music would say is that they, what is it? Something about that they react well, or the reaction to them is good, or they chart well. I don't know. They do these extensive music surveys, and there might be one or two songs which I've either, you know, played them to death, or I wasn't a massive fan of in the first place. And if that's the case, I'll maybe just not say much about them when I play them. But like I said, 99% of the songs I play I like, and that's a good position to be in, I'd say.
Because Absolute would be in there with one of the stations I'd listen to if I was wanting to put the radio on, because it does play brilliant music. And I've got like a handful of stations that I would go to, but like you say, I bet it's brilliant for you being able to be on that and playing good music. Otherwise, you'd be on a station that you don't like, possibly doing something that you're not interested in.
Right, and you know, and then you have to fake it. But the lovely thing about being on a station where you do love the music, I think first of all that comes across. You know, I think if you're really passionate about the music and you maybe know little facts about the songs and that kind of thing, then it's, especially with a station like Absolute Radio, where one of the strap lines is real music matters. You know, we're saying that we love rock bands and guitar bands and bands that came together organically and rehearsed in their garages rather than came together in a sort of formulated way on the X Factor or whatever. And that's nothing, you know, I have to say, I hate musical snobbery. If you like a song because it lifts or moves you in some way, then that's great. You know, I'm not about to insult anyone's musical taste or values, but for me, the music that I like is that sort of, that music that has that real authentic feel, the kind of singer-songwriters who wrote the music and sing it like they mean it. You know, it's less interesting to me how you sing, as in, you know, having an amazing voice, than the fact that you wrote those lyrics and those lyrics mean something to you as a musician. You know, that's what's interesting to me personally.
I want to now, obviously talking about music we love, I want to go to the Isle of Wight, and you've obviously done a lot of coverage of that in your time. And
I think 10 years. I think it's coming up for 10 years now, which is crazy.
You've interviewed some massive stars, some of my favourite artists such as The Killers, Paul Weller, Liam Gallagher, Noel Gallagher, and the list just goes on. But what I want to know is, who have been your favourite people to interview at these festivals? If you had to pick some that you've loved interviewing, who would you go for?
Do you know, it's really interesting because every year, certainly with the Isle of Wight Festival, and I always knew that I would be going and there would be certain interviews, you'd sort of look at the lineup and go, okay, well, that...
Always a great lineup too, yeah.
Yeah, always a great lineup. And I think there would be certain, you know, having interviewed sort of Brandon Flowers and the Killers quite a few times now, that's an interview that I'm always going to enjoy doing, because in fact the last time I saw Brandon Flowers at the Isle of Wight Festival, he's quite shy, like surprisingly shy, and when he goes on stage, of course, it's just like he becomes this entirely different person. But the first interview I did with him would have been at the Isle of Wight Festival years and years ago, and I remember going into the dressing room and it smelled amazing. It smelled like massage. I think he just had a massage, so it was like walking into a spa. And obviously, having been in a sort of cold, wet, muddy field for 3 days, I was like, oh, this is heavenly. And we sat, and it wasn't filmed, that first interview, so we just had a really lovely chat, and he was talking about how he had grown up really sort of having this magical sense of what the UK was like it was this mystical place. And I was like, yeah, but for us kind of growing up in Vegas, that seems like a mystical, magical place, very different, you know, to what we're used to. And obviously, you know, quite famously, he sort of had his eureka moment, or his light bulb moment at an Oasis gig. So talking about, you know, in more recent times, being on stage, the same stage as Liam Gallagher or whatever. And I think the last time I'd interviewed him, there'd been a moment where Liam Gallagher come on stage and sort of bowed at him.
Yeah.
So we talked about that, and we talked about Depeche Mode, because they'd headlined that weekend, and he was a massive Depeche Mode fan as a kid, was a younger man. So yeah, you know, he's lovely, and I think the last time I interviewed him at the Isle of Wight, knowing that he can be quite shy, I was actually really surprised, because he came over and gave me a massive hug and was like, hi, and I was like, hi. And you only ever get maybe 4 or 5 minutes with these people, whoever they are, whatever band it is, and there will always be you know, their management or a PR person or someone that's just slightly out of frame of the camera shot, but giving you like the wind up sign, like stop now. And you're sort of, you've got the microphone and you're like, yeah, I can't, because he's still talking. It'd be really rude for me to stop. There was a moment with Tom Jones where I swear the woman was going to just like jump into the camper van and drag him off because he wouldn't stop talking. And so you have to kind of, you know, negotiate and navigate all that as well. With the bigger stars, and certainly, well, not the biggest stars, because they're all big stars, but some of the American stars will have a crazy entourage around them, like, you know, so many people buzzing around them, and it's weird for them, right? Like Pharrell Williams did the Isle of Wight Festival, and I was told I had like 60 seconds or something with him, and they're like, right, go. And I remember the interview was about the fact that it must be really weird for him having all of these people around him all the time. And like, bless him, he just went, yeah, it is really weird. He's like, how would you feel if you had all these people staring at you all the time? And I said, I'd feel like, oh, is there something on my face? Do I need to, like, you know, because he's just a human being. He's an incredibly talented human being, but he's just a human being. And I just think it must be such a strange life for some of them sometimes, when they're, you know, you're at that level of fame where you don't really get to see or speak to anyone. You're just sort of ushered into a car, and then you appear on stage, and then you're ushered away again. It must be such a strange thing, I always think, to be back in that hotel room, having just performed in front of 60,000 people and they're all screaming at you and singing along with your lyrics, and then it's just you again. It must be quite the head spin, mustn't it?
Obviously, yeah, and obviously you saying you loved music growing up and you loved 90s music. Still on the fact of interviewing these people, have you ever thought, wow, I can't believe I'm actually interviewing these? Like, have you ever had someone who you've loved listening to the music for ages and you finally interviewed them and you've been like, wow, I just can't believe I'm here, stood right next to them, speaking to them?
Yeah.
Have you ever had that?
Yeah, quite a few times actually, quite a few times, and especially when it's backstage at a festival, it's just chaos. And you think like backstage would be this sort of like glamorous area, right? And it really isn't. It's just sort of porter cabins where it's still muddy. It's like, I mean, the toilets are slightly nicer, I'd say. The portaloos are probably like a bit cleaner than they are in the main field. But apart from that, you really have to roll with the punches. If you're meant to be doing an interview over one side of the field, you just have to rush there. And then if the artist appears, I mean, I can remember my colleague was meant to be interviewing Liam Gallagher, right? So he'd written all the questions for Liam Gallagher. But when Liam Gallagher showed up, he was on the other side of the festival. So it was Liam Gallagher, I swear to God, appeared in the porter cabin. It'd been absolutely tipping it down. I was making a cup of tea. I turned around. Can I swear? I've said, can I swear?
Yeah.
I turned around and Liam Gallagher's there. And he's like literally like maybe 7 or 8 inches away from my face. And he just looks at me and he goes, fucking hell. And I don't even know what that was about, but I don't know if he was in the wrong place or what had happened. But I ended up doing an interview with him with no preparation whatsoever, which was terrifying for me because I don't know about you, you're doing interviews, you want to be prepared, you want to have the questions, you want to have done some background on the person. I mean, obviously I know him, he's Liam Gallagher, right? But he's got that level of like swagger about him where he's just really intimidating, right? And my boss went to put his hand out to like shake his hand, but Liam Gallagher fist bumped him, and so instead of like shaking his hand, he kind of did this weird shake of the fist bump, and then Liam Gallagher went easy and my boss went kneesy. Or like, what even is that? Like everyone was just going to, like just losing their minds because it's Liam Gallagher. So that was one. And then, I mean, for me, like just a real icon of music is Debbie Harry of Blondie, right? Because you grow up and she's this incredibly strong, powerful woman. And we knew we were interviewing Blondie, but we didn't know when. And Bon Jovi were on the main stage and we were about to cross to them live on the radio. And my boss had said, right, we just need to kill some time before Bon Jovi appear. And as he said that, a golf buggy is hurtling towards us. And on the golf buggy are Blondie, who then gets sort of shoved into our camper van. So I'm sat there next to Debbie Harry, who's like, just like a real, I don't get starstruck by too many people because I've met a lot of very famous people.
You'd be used to it, yeah.
But for, and so the last thing that was ringing in my ears was my boss saying, we need to kill some time. So I say, what better way to kill some time than with Blondie? And I've watched the YouTube video back and I just cringe so much because she looks offended, right? She's like, oh, we're just killing some time. And I'm like, oh my God. And then obviously everyone has a go in the comments. Anyway, I've stopped reading YouTube comments a really long time ago for that reason. But yeah, and I was like, oh no, why did I say that? Like of all the things I could have said to this absolute icon of rock, I said, what better way to kill some time? But you live and learn. And she's amazing. And I think I clawed it back when I watched it. I felt at the time I clawed it back. And when she left, she was really sweet and really kind and said that she'd enjoyed the interview. So, I'll take that. But unfortunately, that part's not on YouTube. That's the way it goes.
But back to it now. You just mentioned there about interviewing Liam Gallagher. For me, he is one of my musical icons. And I can't imagine what it must have been like just being stood there like face to face with him.
Having not prepared an interview. Yeah, it was effing terrifying. It was awful. Like, I'll watch it back now because, again, you know, it's on YouTube. And he was there with BDI on that occasion. And yeah, I can tell how nervous I am. I'm like doubled over in the chair pretty much, just kind of going, right. So, yeah, like, how are you feeling about playing the Isle of Wight Festival? I think I got away with it. Like, I think just about got away with it because there's always sort of general questions you can ask, isn't there? Like, how did you get to the island? Did you come by helicopter like Tom Jones, or did you come by a speedboat like Kasabian? And, you know, so I kind of got away with it, but it was genuinely terrifying. And there was another occasion where the Sex Pistols were headlining. So I was told I was going to interview John Lydon, Johnny Rotten. And before I went, my producer said, just so you know, like, he will look at you like he hates you and he wants you dead. I was like, oh, great, good. I'm really pleased about that. But that's a good lesson, because I think you should always take people as you find them. And although obviously he can be terrifying, he was lovely. He was the nicest guy. He was even talking about the I can't believe it's not butter adverts that he did around that time. And it was just genuinely charming and lovely. So, you know, people can surprise you, I think. Ian Brown of the Stone Roses, I remember interviewing him for VH1 when I worked for them. And the Stone Roses had a real reputation of being really difficult in interviews and not wanting to do any press and all that kind of stuff. So again, that was an interview I went to feeling really nervous and really intimidated. And again, just the nicest guy. You know, he was talking about having a Sunday roast that day, and, you know, just lovely and sweet. And at the end, he said, "Oh, you know, thanks for making it painless," or make, you know, pay me a compliment on the interview. And I just remember sort of breathing this huge sigh of relief and being like, "Oh God, thank God it went okay." Because I think sometimes in your head, you can build a situation up, and then you get it, and then you get through it, and you're like, oh, okay, actually, you know, what was I worried about? And then things happen, especially at festivals, where you've got no control over it. One of the sort of, I laugh about it now, but it was awful at the time. Paul Weller, who is, I've interviewed him quite a few times, and he's a weird one because he can come across as quite surly, and when you watch the interviews back, you can kind of think, oh yeah, he's sort of, I can imagine he'd be quite difficult to interview. But actually, again, you know, before the cameras start rolling, he's a really lovely guy and, you know, very personable. And he was asking me about my radio show and sort of saying, oh yeah, I know, I listen, and yeah, you've got your own show now, and that's great. And I was like, what? This is Paul Weller, this is madness. Yeah, one of the worst moments at the Isle of Wight Festival, we'd had a really lovely interview, and as he was walking away, one of the guys that was recording, the only guy that was recording on a camera, was going like this to me. I was like, what's wrong? And he hadn't pressed record, so none of the interview had been recorded. And someone kind of chased after Paul Weller to ask him if he'd come back and do it again. And of course he said no, because he's a really busy man and he had a show to do at the Isle of Wight Festival. That was a bit gutting. But, you know, it happens, and it will happen again. And it, you know, I think one of the first women I ever worked with in radio, when I was doing the news, if something, you can feel like something's gone really, really wrong, you know, you've gone off air or whatever's happened, she would always go, nobody died. So that's like my benchmark. Yeah. Nobody died. Okay, we haven't got any of that interview, but nobody died. So, you know, don't worry about it. It's fine. It's life.
Obviously, you mentioned wanting a good interview and you being a bit cautious of Ian Brown after the reputation he had, but I can sort of relate to that, because obviously you'll have interviewed people on the radio plenty of times, and I've interviewed quite a few people on this podcast now, and the thing you don't want at all is awkward silences and awkward interviews, because for me, doing this, that is the thing that I dread the most. And is that the same with you when you're on the radio doing an interview?
I think if I was gonna give sort of you some advice, but actually I have to say you're doing a really, really good job, because what I was going to say is when I first started doing interviews and stuff like that, or when I was, at college and starting out, I would concentrate so hard on my questions and what I was saying, and I wouldn't listen enough to the person that was talking. And I think that's something you learn over time. And actually, you've been really good at just letting me blather on about nonsense, so it doesn't apply to you. But I think a lot of interviewers don't really listen to what the person's saying, and it's for me, it's like 95% of the interview is you listening to them, because if you're so fixated on what your next question is, you could miss something really good. They might give you a little gem that is then worthy of your next question, rather than going to like, well, my question 3 is this, so I'm going to ask it regardless. There might be a lovely little gem in there that you'll get like a bit of a scoop on, going back to journalism days, but they might sort of let slip that they're working on a new album or something. And if you're thinking so hard about, well, my next question is, how do you feel about playing the festival, you'll miss that scoop on the next album or whatever. It's just really important to listen to the person that's talking, because I think that's actually what makes a really good interviewer. And if you look at sort of the greatest interviewers historically, that's what they do. Yes, they do their research, and yes, they have good questions, but it's more about listening to what the person's saying and then responding in the appropriate manner so they feel heard,
Because on that, one of the first big ones I had in this was Rick Witter from Shed 7, and I'm a massive fan of the band, and I was a bit like that because I wanted the interview to go so perfectly. So after I finished it and got it uploaded and stuff, I had as much fun watching it back as the people who hadn't seen it before, just like listening in full attention of all, like, not like I wasn't doing it when he was on, but because I wanted it to go that well, like you said with some interviews. I just had so much fun listening back as if I'd never heard it before, because I was that in the moment enjoying it when he first came.
Oh, that's great. Honestly, like that's when you're doing the right thing. If you're that in the moment with it, and you have to be, because if you let your mind wander off while someone's talking, it's going to show.
Finally, Sarah, I'd like to thank you for your time today, and it's been brilliant to have you on. Huge thanks to Sarah for doing this and giving us her time. I hope you've enjoyed it, and I'll see you for the next episode.